Good afternoon, one and all. A warm welcome in a third session of our EFDP and ESTP. I, Mr. Sandeep Rangnatpurkar, on behalf of Sir Dr. M.S. Gosavi, College of Pharmaceutical Education and Research, heartily welcome our today's speaker, Dr. Vivek Borse, sir. Uh, Sir, graduate in pharmacy with gold medal and university first rank from North Maharashtra University, Jalgaon. Ma- He also completed MTech from the National Institute of Pharmaceutical Education and Research, Naipur, Mohali, Punjab. Sir completed PhD from Department of Bioscience and Bioengineering, IIT Bombay, Mumbai. Qualified for numerous competitive examination like GATE, GPAT, DPT, BATE, JRF, CSIRU, GC, NET, NIPER, JE, etc. Sir has 25 international publications to his credit, 3 patents and 9 trademark registration to his credit, published 1 book and 7 book chapters. Sir has invited as an innovator at the Innovations in Medical Science and Biotechnology during the Festival of Innovations held on the lawns of Rashtrapati Bhavan, President Palace, New Delhi. He has been recognized with the award for excellence in thesis work for outstanding research contribution in the PhD. The award was presented by the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, in the fifth convocation of IIT Bombay on 11th of August 2018. Many reputed institutions, national and international agencies have appreciated his work through the numerous awards and honorarium. Sir is going to talk on the topic of effective research proposal writing. Over to you, sir.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for introduction. And once again, thank you very much for inviting for this session to the college and organizers. So the screen is visible, right? Are the slides visible, sir? Can you please check and
Yes,
confirm
sir.
once? All right. So very warm welcome to one and all. I'll be talking on the topic that is effective research proposal writing. As we know that this time is really difficult because we all had lunch and then coming back to the topic and listening to the talk online, that too is very difficult. But I'll make sure that you get some insight into of the research proposal. Probably if possible I will show you also one of my accepted proposal and one of the rejected proposal as well, which were submitted to the government funding agency, to just get an idea that how the proposals are written actually and how they are accepted or rejected. We will discuss various factors affecting this whole process. So let's start with the concept, that is research proposal first thing. So why actually is required, or what is the necessary requirement for the research proposal? So first point here comes to my, and all these slides I have prepared by myself. Let's see that if you have any question, any query at that any point, you can stop and ask, or if any questions are there, you can put it in a chat box, probably can be asked later. So to start with the requirement of research proposal, why and how it comes into the mind, that is first thing is to have a research proposal for the academic, like when we are talking in terms of pharma field or biotechnology or biomedical engineering, medical devices, nanotechnology. So I'll be talking in these contexts as much as possible because I have this kind of area expertise, or the research area I have been working in this area. So first thing is to opportunity to start the independent research career, right? So when we are starting the research career post masters or post PhD, we need to have a strong research proposal which could help us sustain in future, right? Another thing is extension of the research career or enhancement of ongoing research career. So we have seen that many of the teachers who are already there as assistant professor, associate professor, or professors, or even scientists or postdocs working in various institutions, they have to extend or enhance their ongoing career. So to have accolades to their career, to prove their expertise in the field, or to develop as an individual researcher. So they have to work on some kind of projects which would be helping them to grow as a scientist, right? And there is requirement necessity of the research proposal. And then again another point comes to my mind when it comes to the research proposal is having collaboration among the institution, then with the industries, or develop the contacts across the different fields, and having the international exposure as well. Because now the system is so open that you cannot focus on your own college or your own lab. You have to collaborate, you have to be open to accept the collaboration or have the approach towards collaboration in another institution in your city or state or nation, or even at the international level. So this would also help to develop a better research proposal when we are talking about developing or having a better research proposal that has the chances of acceptance and getting funded. And getting funded itself is a different zone, because we can't do science without funding. No one will be. So and we know that at the local colleges or even at the government institution there is always a fund crunch, and there is very less availability of funds, and we can't do work apart from the funding which is given by the various government or non-government organizations. Apart from that, when there is a national exposure, or we have to understand the whole mechanism behind the funding. So there are various funding agencies, but everyone's system is very different. So when you have to approach any funding agency, you have to understand the system first and then put your approach for research proposal for funding, right? Then another objective behind having a good research proposal is development of the subject area knowledge. When you have to work on some research area, you have to develop the subject knowledge. You have to go to the depth of the subject knowledge, develop various applications from the knowledge, and then have some uh, product outcome or process outcomes out of these proposals, right? And last but not least is the objective of funding agencies. So now you know that at national, state, or international level, there are various funding agencies, be it governmental, private, institutional, non-institutional, or even industrial funding agencies, right? So objectives of each funding agencies are different. Let it be in Indian government like DST, DBT, but when they float a call for proposals, they have a specific objective in that, like antimicrobial resistance, tuberculosis, malaria, or maternal and child health care, or drug resistance, so on and so forth. So that objective of funding agency should be appropriately addressed through the research proposal. And these are the major points that overall are important for the research proposal, right? So coming to the examples, probably each one of you might know that there are various funding agencies. When we are talking about Indian scenario, there are two, that is government and private, and international, which is open for all, right? In Indian government, the major funding agencies in the area of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are DST, DBT, ICMR, CSIR. So majorly talking about these four, when we are in the field of pharma or biomedical engineering, medical devices, so we have to focus on these four and the different calls they float all around the year. Apart from that, when we talk about the atomic energy, or even in terms of IT department or space, where the DRDO is also coming into picture, or earth sciences, ICAR, which is agricultural research, and renewable energy department. So different ministry of government of India have different departments through which they float the call for proposal. You have to understand the scope of that and then apply for that. Your background should be supported. We will discuss that in detail when it comes, but just have an idea that these are the examples of government, private, and international. And in terms of private, there is good chances that the private funding agency may be giving you more freedom and more funding. But with the more freedom and funding comes the limitation of the number of selections. So these private institutions like Tata Trust or Reliance or Infosys, so these are biggest in India, which support the research and development in terms of academics or having the collaboration with the industry. Okay. And the Tata Innovation or Infosys Award, you might know that Infosys Award is the biggest one in India, and it is like equivalent to Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, which is the Indian government's highest honor to any scientist in India. So such kind of private funding agencies are also putting a lot of effort and funding to grow the science, to grow the scientists, and to grow the applications of various research that is done in India. Apart from that, when we talk about the international scenario, so you might know that most of the fellows who are doing the postdoctoral fellowship or the scientists who are renowned abroad or in big labs, international level institutions, so there are various funding agencies like Wellcome Trust, and Indian government through DBT has alliance with the Wellcome Trust, and they have a separate call for Indian scenario. Then there is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, GCC. So great to know that most of the Indian labs now are applying and getting these kind of grand challenges explorations or grand challenges fundings for the different applications in India. And uh, last, I mean, the list will be exhaustive if we talk about the international funding agencies, because regional also, like European or the American or the South Asian countries or Japanese, so there are lot many international agencies which are involved in the process of funding the research across the globe. And yes, you have to individually apply, you have to individually see their web pages, see the norms and all, to get an idea about what exactly their scope and what exactly you can achieve through applying their funding agencies. All right, so this is just example, and I am sure that each one of you who is interested in writing a research proposal to get the funding for that might have an idea about more and more such names, right? Be it in Indian scenario where there is government as well as private funding agencies, or in terms of international funding agencies. Now let's discuss about the understanding the requirement. So when the funding agency, any funding agency, floats the call for proposal, they have their certain objectives fixed for that, right? Apart from that, funding is also fixed, and they have a structured application process. But when, as an individual researcher, we are developing our proposal that need to be submitted to that funding agency, we have to take care of the requirement. We have to understand the requirement of the funding agency, right? And in terms of these points, first is a scope of research. So what exactly the scope of research in which the funding agency is looking for the proposal? Like I said, when DBT or DST or ICMR is floating the proposal, they will clearly mention that what kind of research scope they expect in this. It will not be like common proposal, it will be very much specific in the area. No doubt there are common proposals also through SERB or DST or DBT, but in that also there are various channels, various identified classified areas in which the proposals would be submitted. So you have to understand the scope of the research, if it is agricultural, biotechnology, pharma related, or medical devices related. And that too inside, I mean, into the sub classification, the scope of research is like drug delivery engineering, or which area it is required, right? Then the second point would be eligibility criteria. All the calls for proposal or the notifications that come for the call for proposal through funding agency, they do mention the eligibility criteria. So if there is age limitation of the individual principal investigator, because when you are applying for any funding agency, you have to have your own credibility also, your affiliation also, and apart from that, all the academic as well as research track record is also required. And in that term they ask for eligibility, like age or any institutional requirement or any publication requirement, patent requirement, previous publication or previous project requirement. So suppose if you have got any DBT or DST project already, then probably high chances that you may not be able to apply for the same project again, right? And there you are not in the picture. And that's how you need to check the eligibility criteria first, that if you are really eligible to apply for the project. So sometimes then they ask for positions also, like you can be assistant professor or not more than associate professor. So likewise, depending on the age and phase of the career of individual researcher, there are different funding agencies which give proposals or which call for proposal, and there the eligibility criteria matters a lot. Then next point is submission guidelines. So clearly they will be having their own. And nowadays, mostly all the formats are in online submission mode only, because gone are the days when you have to put all the printouts, fill up the applications, take a printout and submit it by post or send it via post to the funding agency. I have done that in when I was in IIT Bombay. At that time, I was privileged to work with Professor Rohit Srivastav. In whose lab I have seen that multiple projects were there. I have contributed directly as well as indirectly in all the projects throughout the PhD. So that time itself, I understood the whole mechanism very well. We could write to many funding agencies. We could fetch few of the funding agencies grant, and we have worked on the multiple projects accordingly. So that time I have seen that some of the submissions were required to be sent in physical mode, that you have to take a printout and then submit the whole package. So it was like 300 400 pages print it would be. But nowadays, almost all the funding agencies, they are accepting things in the online mode, so you just have to upload your documents and send it across. All right. Then the funding limits. So when any funding agency is planning for call of proposal, they need to have the budgeting done for their part, right? So if any government ministry is having call for proposal, they need to have the budget for that, and from that budget they can afford to have the multiple calls for proposal accepted, right? So that funding limitation is on the front of funding agency, not by our end, right? Our end is a budgeting which we will do for our own proposal. We will discuss that also. But funding limits are there. So some of the funding agencies, they do clearly mention that okay, we will provide you 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs, 35 lakhs or 70 lakhs or in multiple crores of proposal. So they do give some idea that okay, whenever you are preparing any proposal, do have it in mind that this funding agency will be having restriction of this capping of the budget. All right. So this is very important to understand the funding limit, because probably the funding agency is expecting a big proposal and you are going with the short proposal which will be like 5 or 10 lakh kind of budgeting proposal. So that itself will not be matching in the scope of the funding agency. That you need to take care that okay, you have to understand that what could be the possible limit where you can put your proposal, make it shorter or make it diversify in an area and have that whole picture put in place, so that the justification would be there. So if you are asking for 50 lakh, the timeline like 3 years 5 years project, and then the utilization of funds could also be there possibly. Then the next thing is evaluation criteria. So as everything is in online mode, your first thing of evaluation or screening would be done most probably through the artificial intelligence based softwares, wherein the eligibility norms will be checked first. If you are eligible, automatically those will be sorted without any human intervention. All right. So mostly we try to keep all the proposals in a format that okay, at least that technical step or technical screening step would be clarified where there is no human intervention. All right. So evaluation criteria start from right from there. When you submit your application, when you submit your proposal to any funding agency through their portal, that time itself the evaluation starts. First step is that technical, where the AI based tools can sort the application and send it for the next step. Then the probable non technical teams from the funding agency would sort them by looking at the proposal eligibility and all the other things, and then it is forwarded to the important part, that is reviewers. So reviewers of the funding agency are no one but the experts in the field, who can look into your proposal, who can see if the proposal has that potential to be converted into the great idea and to be funded, right? So there is justification for every point, that if the proposal should be funded or not, right? And that is the evaluation, and the reviewers of course will send comments to the funding agency, and funding agency can communicate with the individual researchers if required, if any feedback is required, or if any more justification is required for budgeting part or for research methodology part, or any other part, right? So this is how the whole evaluation process goes on. So you have to understand these whole process by virtue of the requirements, right? And last but not the least, where you can have the detailed idea is reading the guidelines of the funding agency in detail multiple times, right? Because you might miss few points which will be very critical, right? So best way is to read the guidelines multiple times, understand what actually they are looking for in terms of scope, in terms of eligibility, if you are eligible or not, then what are the submission guidelines, how long it will take for you to gather all the information, put it in a final picture, and then have the permissions also. We will discuss that also, because it's not about the proposal as an individual you are writing. Most of the time the funding agency ask for endorsement from your institution, because as an individual researcher, being a assistant professor, associate professor, or professor in any institution, you have to have your affiliation, and that affiliation should endorse you, that okay, this person is submitting the proposal to funding agency and we don't have any problem or conflicts with that, we will be ready to support in terms of lab or requirement or any other kind of thing, because that is kind of host institution for that purpose, right? So in that term you have to get clear every point to understand the requirement of the funding agency. All right. Then the most important part of any research proposal is developing a clear research question. Right? Although we have seen the scope from the funding agency is the prime important, but suppose if you have expertise in antimicrobial resistance or in terms of anti-tuberculosis drug delivery systems, so in that case, when the call for proposal is there from the, suppose from DBT, there is a call for proposal in antimicrobial resistance, and for that proposal submission, you should have your clear research question, that what kind of work you are going to do, right? And that the good research proposal should start with the clear and concise research question, and which will be your problem statement. So what exactly you are going to do and why is important in terms of the problem statement, what problem you are going to address and how will come into the objectives part, but what is your problem statement is the most important point, that what kind of work you are going to do and how will come into the objectives part. So this is the important part of any research proposal. I think झालंय. Hello, am I audible, sir? Hello. Hello, am I audible, sir? Can you please check once?
Sir, you are audible. Please share your slides.
Sure, sure. So I think we were here, right, on this slide.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Developing a clear research question. Yeah. So sorry for the interruption. There is power cut, and I don't know how and suddenly it happened. But anyway, so coming back to the research question. So as I told, a clear and concise research question is the first and primary most important thing through which your proposal would be started evaluated. The research question should be well defined. It should be relevant to the scope and address a significant scientific problem. So, depending on the quantum of fellowship or funding that would be awarded, it should be a significant scientific problem that you would be solving or addressing through your proposal, right? Next is a detailed literature review. So, how the problem statement would be decided is completely based on how thorough your literature review is in that field. This literature review is required to establish the need for the proposed research. So, apart or if you don't have the proper literature support, you cannot establish the need. Right? What is the need of your proposal? So, you need to have the proper thorough literature review for each and every point that you are putting in your proposal. Second is existing knowledge is there. Through literature review we know that existing knowledge is there, but you need to find and highlight the gaps in the current literature. What are the issues with the current applications or current processes that are already available? You have to have knowledge of those gaps and you have to highlight those gaps so that the importance of your proposal would definitely be increased. Then demonstration of how the proposed research area will address this gap, right? So we already have said that if you identify gap, you have to justify that how your proposal will be addressing these gaps. Then next is outline the research methodology. So now you have completed your 2 points, that is problem statement and then the literature. Then coming to the core or the heart of the proposal is your research methodology. Each and every person or as an individual scientist is having some developed expertise in some of the research area, right? So in that terms, you have to have your own research methodology for addressing the problem statement through the proper objectives. And there it comes is having a detailed research design or the principle or mechanism how you are going to solve that problem, right? How you are going to develop the project to address that problem. Apart from that, the research proposal should also have the clear idea about what would be the data collection methods, analysis techniques that you will be using, any softwares that you are going to put, any AI based technique that would be involved. Because whatever points I am speaking is like current requirement of the funding agencies. Most of us are still formulating the proposal based on the like previous experiences, and then the issue is with the current requirements, and we are there is a lag between that, right? So you have to just match up with the current requirement and understand what are the current requirements. Then there is a sample size calculation. Okay, so if you are going for clinical trials or clinical methods which are for the clinical sample testing, then you have to have the clear picture of what would be your sample size, right? Then demonstrate the feasibility of proposed methodology. So whatever methodology you are going to develop, so suppose in my own terms if I talk, uh, I was working on the in vitro diagnostics, right? And in vitro diagnostics the proposed methodology was lateral flow immunoassay, that too fluorescence based lateral flow immunoassay. And in that the proposed methodology is lateral flow immunoassay, but I have to give them the sample size also, that how many number of clinical samples I will be developing, what are the clinical sample collection methods or data collection methods after testing and all. So all these points we have to mention priorly only in the proposal. Then justify the appropriateness to address the research question. So how appropriately your research methodology would address the research question. So that link should be there, that if any question you are proposing, any research topic or problem statement you are putting, you have to have some kind of appropriate method, and then the correlation of that how your methodology would be useful to solve the problem. Then apart from that, if any other necessary resources requirement is there or any collaborations are required for that particular objective achievement, because as an individual in any institution it's very difficult to propose a proposal and then carry out the whole proposal. Suppose if you are funding, because most of the time what happens is uh, haphazardly or half-heartedly we apply for the funding agency, and that's where the problem is. You don't understand what complete requirements are there for the complete proposal. And suppose in that case you are funded, then what after that? That is the biggest question, because if we are not prepared that how the project would be executed, and if you are funded, then the real problem is also there. And I know few of the examples or scenarios where I have seen that unexpectedly the project was funded, and then the issue were there that they were not able to achieve the first year objectives, and then the funding agency report where they were asking for the reports and data and all, and that's how the problems start. Also, we will discuss that also in later stage. First, let's focus on the points which are required to compile the research proposal in first place, right? So that should be effective proposal methodology. So I hope you everyone is understanding till this point that this research methodology is the third point in proposal. And then the budgeting. So in first slide, we have seen the budget restriction on the part of funding agency, that too in the scope of the proposal. But when we are writing our own proposal, we should have our own budget for our proposal. So in that terms, you should have included all your expenses. Why we are writing to funding agency? To get the fund, and what the fund will be used for is to be mentioned in the budget file, right? You have to give all the requirements such as personal requirement, like recruitment of the project staff, JRF, SRF, project assistant, or likewise category. Then the consumables in terms of chemicals or any requirements for the execution of the project. Then contingency, equipment purchase, the travel for the project purpose, then overhead to the institution where the project is executed, and then all the other expenses that could be there need to be mentioned clearly in the budget part. Okay, and that budget part is probably looked into the later phase of the evaluation, because first phase of evaluation, as I told, is to the review expert process. But when it goes to funding agency, again, if any proposal has ability or potential to be funded, then funding agency will look into the budget part most importantly. That if really you are asking something which is realistic, which is feasible, and which is justifiable, you need to look into these points when you are writing anything in terms of the budget, right? So your budget should be appropriate. First thing, should not be more than what the funding agency is offering. Second thing, whatever you are putting should be realistic, feasible, and justifiable. Because before giving any funding, the all the funding agencies, let it be government or private, they will certainly ask you once about these factors. You should be better ready for these justifications. Then next point is a timeline, right? Here I have given one example only, right? That example is for the PhD program, but forget about the PhD program or something like this. You have to have the idea of this whole picture, that how the timelines will be project. So suppose the project here is 3 years, right? So as it is mentioned, the 3 years project, and individually every month is there. So all the 12 columns are for the month wise. So you have to do like 36-month complete picture is there. And then on the left hand side, you need to have the objectives of your project, like from the first step, that is literature, or in terms of recruitment of the staff or purchase of the consumable or equipment, and then to achievement of individual objective year wise. You need to have this Gantt chart. This is called as the Gantt chart. It can be prepared in the Excel, and which gives you a better picture and idea, not only for the proposing the timeline, but when, if you get any funding proposal done and you are getting funding for your proposal, to to monitor the project progress, you can continuously keep on watch to this factor, and then you can plan your work accordingly. So this help not only to funding agency to understand what timeline you are targeting, but also to yourself, who is individual principal investigator, to see that if they are able to achieve all the objectives on the time, and accordingly they can work in that zone, that okay, we have to rapiding the process of any of the objective, and that will again be justified in terms of the funding agency. All right, so this is one point everyone must be very much clear, and should work not only for funding agency or proposal, but for any other thing that you are doing, that in terms of objectives and then the clear cut timeline. So you should be having the complete mindset that okay, you are planning some work and it could be achieved at this particular time. Then the next thing is demonstrating the significance and impact of the research. So to convince the funding agency or to convince the reviewers, you have to have the identification of potential benefit of the research. Whatever research you are planning, what that research could offer to the large, that is for healthcare sector or agriculture sector or biotechnology sector. So you have to have the potential benefits listed in the proposal. so that it can be clearly visible that okay, if you are funding this particular proposal, it could really be helpful in terms of benefits to the researcher, other researcher, or the public at large, right? And then there is a contribution to scientific knowledge, so that should be incremental or developmental only. You should not be proposing something which is just change in some parameters in existing research and then putting for proposal. In today's world, no one is going to fund that particular thing. People who are in funding agency or in an expert reviewer, they are looking for the disruptive idea, something new, something incremental, or rather than incremental, most is the disruptive developmental projects the funding agencies are looking for, because till now they were funding to the same thing like incremental or just adjustmental thing. But they do know now that whatever funding done till now is not so useful, that the applications are not really developed. Because personally or individually, when you think about the projects or funding agency sanction that are done to you individually, your colleagues, or your known person, we have seen that very few of them are completed on time with the funding and giving some output to the society at large. Because after all, when it comes to government funding agency, it is like public money, so we are accountable and responsible to handle that fund. But what after all the funding agency is expecting, or the audit is expected, is you need to have some kind of fruitful output after your project. But we see that people get the funding, then they have the publications, patents, and all done. I mean, individually I also did the same. But that is the problem, we don't look for the product development after all, or the looking for the commercialization of the product development. So the funding agency have to come up with the another model, that is translational model. So nowadays currently the translational research is in highlighting demand, that they don't want any similar kind of work, or they don't are looking for any research publication or patent. People now want is a product, right? And that is translational product. Whatever research you have done, fine, you have proved your expertise in area, but now they are looking for the product. So this particular product development would be helping in today's world. If you are pitching to any funding agency that you are going to develop the product, and for that you have already established some proof of concept and primary work is done, and then you are going to have a product in future. Then another point is addressing the societal need. As we discussed, that if it is government funding agency, then they will be having the calls in the larger public domain. Like we have seen, when COVID was on peak, then almost all the funding agencies were floating calls for proposal for either COVID treatment or diagnosis or any other thing that is related to COVID. Okay, even in terms of I mean, not only the science, but also in terms of logistics or vaccine development or any other thing where the COVID was concerned, right? So these were the parameter where the scope was, major scope or focus was to address the societal needs, right? So when you are approaching to funding agency with such kind of scope, then you need to have your proposal moderated or developed in a such manner that you should be addressing the societal needs in a very clear and crystal clear manner, right? So that could be highlighting and useful for further steps. And then the applications, probably in promoting the environmental application or health sector or economic development, or as I said, transportation or logistic part development. So those will be kind of different area, but in our case it will be like healthcare sector, or it could be advantages or the developmental potential of healthcare sector. So your proposal should clearly demonstrate the significance and impact of the research on these fields, right? The next point is including the appropriate references and citations in your proposal. So why that is important? It is important to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the existing literature. So as we said in literature review, you have to, I mean, if anyone is using working on a proposal to develop a vaccine and they are not citing the appropriate references, then the expert reviewer will certainly be concerned about the understanding of subject area or knowledge of the applicant, right? if you are in any subject and you are not highlighting, you are not referring, you are not citing the important or the most important principle based references, then the reviewer certainly will be having some doubt that okay, if you really know the field, if you really know the basic principles and mechanism, because you have not cited that particular references. And that personally I have seen that when we were applying for one proposal and we did not cite, and the proposal went to the same reviewer, that he had a very great record in that area and we did not cite any of their paper. So we came to know that okay, we had to cite because they have that track record. Somehow we missed some point, but that's why these kind of interactions are required to make understand that you have to include appropriate references and citations to demonstrate your understanding of the subject area, and then highlight the credibility of proposed research. So when you are proposing any hypothesis or any idea to funding agency, the credibility will be highlighted only when the appropriate references are provided with the support of that area. All right. And I think this is last but not the least, but the most important part, that is the writing part. Because somehow we have to write it, right? Somehow the proposal need to be submitted to the portal of that funding agency web page, but when they ask for uploading the document, those are either word file or those are in the PDF format, right? So you have to write, you have to have the system, and writing a proposal in a proper format is also the most critical part, which is a physical examination of your efforts. All right. And that is writing a clear and concise proposal. So first thing, your language, right? Most of us, I mean, I don't know the about the audience, but for myself it was, earlier days it was really difficult to formulate the sentences in terms of a great scientific English as a language. But nowadays, the best advantage of technology that has done is having the add-ins in words itself, like Grammarly is there, or even Turnitin is there to check the plagiarism is there or not. So there are a lot many tools available nowadays for the improved writing. And nowadays, I mean, this AI based chat gpt is coming. So I also have explored chat gpt, and it is good actually to have help in terms of developing any kind of paragraph or sentences, and that actually helps. So these kind of tools probably you need to explore a lot, because you can't sit and write the proposal in one go. You have to have small parts and then build it into the complete proposal. So in that term, your proposal should be in a clear and concise based on the language that you are using, so that when anyone is reading that, should be conveying your uh, understanding of the subject as well as conveying your approach to solve the problem, right? Then next important point is the following the format and guideline provided by the funding agency. No doubt all the funding agency, when they are putting for notification, they will provide the guidelines for submission as well. And I know that most of us will having experience of publishing a paper, right? So at that time we have followed all the journal guidelines, right? So similarly, the publication of the notification by funding agency, they have the guidelines for funding agency proposal. Okay. And in that also the formatting in terms of point wise, that which point are they focusing on, or what should be the sequence of proposal. We will see that through one example. I'll show you one example, what are the probable points there should be in the proposal. Then organizing the proposal logically with each section clearly labeled. So ideally it is like introduction, literature, objective statement, research methodology, budget, timeline, and scope and future scope of the proposal. So these are like common points that are involved. Okay. And in that sequential manner, you need to organize your proposal logically. So this comes into the picture when we talk about the writing a clear, concise proposal. And now the last part, that is editing. Okay. Then feedback, revision, and final submission. So of course, no doubt we have to submit the proposal when you're writing. So I'll start with the last point first, is the submitting the proposal. Just keep in mind that you should be submitting the proposal well before the time, because last moment and some requirement is there and you are missing that requirement would lead to the missing point. Okay. And that will be the great missing point that you will not be able to submit the proposal. So first thing is you need to submit the proposal well before time. So if in case if any other document requirement is there, you will be able to furnish that and submit that on time, right? So, and another thing is the problem with the portals of the funding agencies, right? Most of the government like DST, DBTs, they have very well developed portal now, but somehow when the load is more or the size of the files are more, then at the last moment the problem happens and you are not able to submit the proposal, right? And that creates a lot of issues actually. That's why I took this point as a first. So submitting, just plan it to submit well before time so that you are ready with all the required document, because with the increase in funding amount, there is increase in submission of lot many documents, not only your proposal or the core idea. Apart from that, all the other certificates, endorsement, even the quotations for the equipments are required, right? So you have to keep in mind that okay, if you are going to submit the proposal, you have to have all these documents with you, and then only your proposal will be completely or will be eligible for submission. Now coming to the first point, editing and revising the proposal. So suppose you have considered all the points that we have discussed, you have put in a proposal in a Word format, but somehow you will have to edit and revise it multiple times to ensure that it is clear, understanding is clearly conveyed, it is concise and free of error. So you should edit and keep on revising it to make it more perfect. Then, before submitting a research proposal, seek the feedback from the colleagues, mentors, and experts in the field. This probably is most important thing, because people or individual researchers who have got the similar kind of funding earlier could guide you better to make your proposal appropriate as per the requirement of the funding agency. So you should always seek for feedback from such people. Maybe they are your colleague or your mentors who have already guiding you, or the experts in the field, because you never know that the same expert in the field may be the reviewer of the proposals, right? So when it comes to the expert, so I also get some proposal from DST or ACRB for review. At that time, I don't only look at those proposals by virtue of reviewing, but I also look at those proposals by virtue of, if I have been asked to write a proposal now, what I should do, right? So that gives me a better idea and understanding that okay, these kind of proposal are there which are more clearly written, or which are giving more better images, schematics, or giving more better point wise description of their hypothesis, problem statement. So in that manner, the expert in the field will be best as a guide to you when you are approaching to any particular funding agency, and if they have got a great experience or they have got a similar kind of funding in the area. Then the next is this kind of exercise of editing, feedback, and revision helps you to understand the weaknesses and area for improvement in your own proposal, right? So you should revise based on the feedback received and then go for the submission. The submission step we have discussed. Keep in mind, you should be submitting well before time. You should be ready with all the document, ready with the full proposal. So I probably I have covered the points till now. I just had an expertise in this DST Inspire program because I was the DST Inspire faculty fellow, and I went through this process. So I had this few slides, but which are more specific to the DST only. So I will not go much into detail of this, which is like DST Inspire program. They have different program. I did apply for this one, which is faculty award, and you can see into details later on probably. But for uh, better proposal, whatever points required, we already have discussed. But for me, what I went through are these points like eligibility, being PhD, age limit, then academic profile, publication record. So all these were the points wherein I had to uh, gone through in eligibility criteria to get the DST Inspire faculty fellowship, right? And then of course the call for proposal, their deadlines. So this you can just correlate that not only for DST Inspire but other funding agencies also. They come for the call like once in a year, two times in a year, or depending on the funding agencies regulations. So there could be call for proposal multiple times in a year or once in a year. Then of course the website, the process online, and you should have a better idea in terms of the number of selection. So suppose if any call comes from DST or ACRB, you should have a better idea that okay, how many funding they are going to give or how many proposals they are going to accept. So in that terms you are better prepared. Even if it is rejection, you are better prepared that okay, if you have chances of acceptance or not. But no doubt you should have your proposal in such manner that the chances of acceptance and getting funded are of course more. Then the areas, of course, that is different areas are there in science or technology, engineering, and mathematics, across which the fundings are given. So this data I have presented is only for the DST Inspire faculty. So over the years, the number of fellows and all. Then the mode of application. So for DST I have mentioned, but for the other funding agencies, the mode of application or method of selection, as we have discussed, like online application, shortlisting, most of the time there is interview and presentation and then the final selection. And it does not stop there. If you are selected, then the process actually start. That is getting funding, execution of the project, submission of the utilization certificate and expenditure certificate, review meetings, review reports, and then getting the next year funding also. Because when we are proposing, so in my case, it was like 5 year proposal. So every year after completion of 1 year, again send the reports to funding agency and to fetch the next year research grant for execution of the project. So these are few points which were related to DST Inspire faculty fellowship in core. But yeah, so this is one example of budget breakup, as I said. So you should have all the components as a head, and then year-wise breakup should be there. The total percent of grant that is utilized under each heading should also be mentioned. So in my case, these were the parameters like consumable, research staff, travel, contingency, capital, overhead, and the total. So each of these should match, and then you should have a justification also in your detailed proposal. Then of course terms and condition for the funding agency are there, and your institution, affiliated institution, act as a host, because you are not individually getting direct funding from the funding agency. The funding agency will give grant to your institution through which your project will be handled. So probably that comes into the later part after getting the research proposal accepted. But now coming to the important points to discuss for the research proposal part. So I think we have just highlighted that how the proposal are screened. As I said, the initial technical submission, then review by the expert, and then decision by the funding agency based on the interview or justifications or discussions with respect to the individual proposal, right? Then there is a clear cut help when you are communicating with the funding agency, and that too on a call or via email. If you have any problem in funding agency call or notification, or if you are not clear about any guideline, so there is certainly importance of communication with the funding agency. You must communicate if you have any problem. You can't simply understand and guess on that okay, this is the case, that it will be considered or not. Just write an email to the funding agency or the coordinator. Nowadays it is very much clear, concise system by the funding agency as well, that they do respond to such kind of communications. Okay, so make sure that if you have any query, you should immediately write back to the funding agency, right? And I have done that most of the time. I got a good reply and the queries were solved immediately. So that do help, that the communication with funding agency is very important in terms of writing a effective research proposal, right? So then this proposal process, as we have seen, the process of rejection. So first step, I mean, when we are starting, like if you write a proposal, it is rejected. So nowadays most of the funding agencies, they do also give the reason for the rejection, which helps us to make a better proposal next time, no doubt. And as I said, the mentors, colleagues, or expert in the field would be a better guide. But even after implementing all those suggestions, there could be rejection, but that rejection will or should come with a reason. And if you understand that reason, you can prepare a better proposal next time, right? And then if it is accepted, then the next step, as I discussed, is a justification. They do ask for some time for any budget requirement or equipment requirement or research methodology question is there, then they ask for the justification. Then there is selection, and then fund availability, making the funds available, execution of the project, report submission, UCSCs, Then project management as a PI or co-PI of the project, attending the review meeting, answering the questions that why they should fund or they should keep on funding to the next year. And then upon completion after 3 years or 5 years of the project, what is the outcome? That is the most important question by the funding agency, and they expect some kind of outcome when it comes to the translational research. Okay, then we have to consider the factor if you are writing individually or as a team or as a PI and co-PI of the project. So not all the time you could be PI of the project. Sometimes you are co-PI of the project, but your inputs or your writing is required in that term, right? And if it is multi-institutional collaboration, that is also important. That not only individual institute but multiple institutions coming into picture, or there is academic and industry collaboration is there, which nowadays funding agencies require more. They ask for this kind of collaboration because the outcome is more viable in that case. And just need to avoid any kind of conflict when you are writing any proposal in terms of towards funding agency or in terms of your research methodologies, right? Then there is a project and fund management to be considered after funding, no doubt, and then coordination between the funding agency and the host institution. So these points come when your project or research proposal is funded. So there are multiple things which come into picture when you are writing the effective research proposal. So far I have covered whatever I felt that could be the important point in this. And one of the best link I could find for this list of funding agencies in India for government is some website is there, that IIT Delhi webpage was there, and that had a compiling of all the funding agencies in India of different department and ministries. So that you can Google and do it, probably IIT Delhi website it is. So to summarize today's discussion on effective writing for the research proposal is, first of all, you need to keep on seeking the opportunities. Right? Your idea should be clear, where you are going to apply, when you are going to apply, to whom you are going to apply. So you need to seek the opportunities. You need to look for those. And nowadays, most of the funding agencies, they are very much active on the social media, like LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. They are very much active. If there is any call for proposal, they will put it on the social media, and that is equivalent to their website. But we don't have time to watch to individual website of the funding agency. But yes, individually, each one of us somehow is associated with the social media, let it be Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. So in that sense, if you get to see such kind of social media inputs from the website of the funding agencies, there is where you can seek your opportunities, that okay, this kind of proposal is open, you should start working on your proposal for the submission, right? Then understanding the need and requirement, what is the scope, what is the eligibility, what is the funding limit from the funding requirements, right? Then the problem statement, what is the quality of literature, what is the quality of the knowledge gap you are addressing is important. Then doing the literature review and establishing or putting the existing research methodology of your expertise to address the objectives of your problem statement. Then the clear cut idea about timeline and the budget part, because timeline in terms of like 18 months, 36 month, or 5-year project. So depending on the timeline, you should be very much clear that on what time your which objectives will be in work, right? And the budget, how much expenditure will be there exactly, right? And last but not the least is the most important point is impactful writing, because that's what is going to be read by the expert in the funding agency. So you should have a impactful writing. Your proposal should be concise with very good English language. As I said, various tools are available. Do use those tools to make your proposal better. All right. So with this, I would like to thank all of you for attending this, and I would like to thank my institution where I got the opportunity to work on various projects proposed for the various funding agencies like DBT, DST, and then at IIT Guwahati as well as NIPER Hyderabad. And currently, I mean, I think in introduction it was missed, but I have now like exactly 4 months now. I have shifted to the private industry in medical devices currently. Yeah, so thank you very much, and if any questions are there, I'll be ready to answer those. Thank you once again, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your valuable sharing and experience. Uh, any questions from audience? Sir, we will wait for 2 minutes. Okay.
Sure, no problem. Yeah.
Is there any query? Sir, hello.
Hello. Yes, sir.
Sir, I have one query.
Yes,
If
yes.
a person is teaching faculty in a teaching sector and
Right.
he is pursuing the doctorate, means PhD in, suppose, for example, stream of pharmaceutics or pharmaceutical chemistry, is there any criteria that he or she must be have a, need a approval from that respective university to get the JRF from any non-government or government sector?
I am not clear about your question. Can you please repeat concisely? Because
Means,
I could
sir,
understand that you are working in
if the
institution and then.
faculty,
Mhm.
am I audible, sir?
Yeah, yeah, please.
If the teaching faculty in the
Hmm.
stream of pharmaceutical science is
Hmm.
working in a India,
Hmm.
is there any need that he or she must be affiliated to that particular university of India to get the JRF or scholarship or the grant from that any government or non-government sector? Is there any
Yeah.
requirement in that? Means
Yes,
he
sir.
or she must be
Affiliation.
permanently approved or any sort of thing, age limit or
So
what?
that's what it comes into the eligibility criteria of the funding agency. They do ask most of the time that the individual. So if it depends, like if it is a core research grant from the DST, which is for little senior level, so they do ask that the faculty should be a regular faculty in the institution. And in terms of IITs or ICER or NIPERS and all, regular faculty means having the assistant professor as a position. But in terms of universities or institution like state government institutions or state government affiliated universities and institutions, so there you need to have the affiliation from the institution or the university, and then you will be eligible for submission of the proposal.
Okay. Uh, there is one question, sir.
Yes.
Can you? There is question from audience. Can you
Yes.
elaborate on travel grants? Some,
So travel grant maybe of two type. Now the question is not clear, probably I will answer both things. One is travel grant to attend the conferences. So personally I applied for the travel grant in 2016 when I was traveling to Europe for funding to DBT, DST as well as the institution, and I got from all. So that is like submitting the proposal to funding agency, and there are some travel grants from individual institutions or individual funding agency that they do provide the travel grant to the individual to attend the conferences. But in that terms also similarly you will have to submit all the documents and support your, I mean, you have to have the invitation for attending that conference from the international organizer. So mostly we have the travel grant for the international visits or travel, and then they do mention that whatever will be paid, like international air travel, registration fees, visa fees, stay, and all the other things. Yeah, so this is one thing, that is travel for conferences, to attend the international conferences. And then the second is, in your funding, if you have a project, you got a funding, in that there is a travel head. Okay, in that travel head also you can individually attend the conference, or you can send the student to attend the conferences and fund their travel or registration fees. Yeah, so I hope I have addressed the query on travel grant.
okay. I think there is no more questions. Uh, so, thank you, sir, for your valuable sharing and experience. Sir
Thank
has
you very much, sir.
effectively mentioned about the research proposal writing. What is research proposal? What are the points to be covered under research proposal? What are the various funding agencies from government, non-government, and international sectors? What are the requirements for effective research writing? like what is the scope, eligibility, submission guidelines, funding limits, evaluation criteria, and other guidelines reading. Sir, exhaustively explain about the steps in research proposal, what are the requirements, what are the key features to be explained. On behalf of Sir Dr. M.S. Gosavi, I am very thankful to Sir for your valuable guidance and experience.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of Sir Dr. M.S. Gosavi, uh, I will I'm handling over this token of appreciation towards you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Please kindly accept.
Yeah, thanks to
Thank
all
you,
the
sir.
attendees also who have spared time to attend this session, and that too, as I told, a very difficult session to do after lunch.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Now
you very much.
I declare that session is over. Next,
Yeah.
next session. Okay.
So I shall be closing this, right?
Yeah.